Roses for Mama by Janette. Chapter 20. Changing Plans. Charlie came in for coffee the next morning. Angela sensed something was bothering him, but he made no comment. Instead, he talked with Thomas about the latest storm, wondering how Gus was getting along with his new boss, and promised Angela that come spring he would help her with her garden. "Is your cabin warm enough?" Thomas asked. Charlie nodded, pride in his eyes. "I helped the boss build that little place. We made sure that it was sound and solid," he said, the gleam in his eyes again. "Got everything in there that a man needs." "So why aren't you happy?" Angela wanted to ask, but she held her tongue. Thomas asked the question Angela was thinking, though in a roundabout way. He simply gave Charlie the opportunity to bring up what was bothering him. "What can we do for you, Charlie?" Charlie sat and stirred the cream in his coffee. Round and round went his spoon, and Angela imagined his thoughts going round and round too. It was a long time before he spoke. "Been doing some thinking," Charlie said at last. "It really weren't right the way I handled young Mr. Stratton. I mean, well, he is the boss's boy, and I reckon if it had been me, I would have wanted all of my pa's land myself. I could have just given him back his land, not made a public show of it like I did." There was silence again. Charlie raised his head, his eyes troubled. "Reckon your pa would have done it different," he said with conviction. Thomas nodded. "Reckon," he agreed. "Well, I've been thinking as to how I owe the young feller an apology," said Charlie. Angela stiffened. At one point she would have agreed, but after the events of the previous evening she had little compassion for Carter Stratton. "Well, I figure as how I best hike myself on over there and speak my little piece. Don't know if he'll accept my words or not, but I gotta be a-sayin' 'em if I want to live with myself, that is." Thomas nodded. They sat in silence again. Angela wished to speak, wished to stir, wished to flee, but she did none of these things. Her own thoughts went round and round in her head. "I watched your folks for a good number of years," Charlie went on slowly. "I don't think they would have taken things on just for spite, like I done. Now, mind you, I don't claim to be religious like your folks were, but they were good folks. Funny." Charlie hesitated and then chuckled softly. "I find myself thinking about your pa and asking myself, what would Carl have done? And your ma. Well, she was kindness itself. Never done a thing in her life for spite, your ma. One time she says to me, 'Charlie, the Lord says we are to forgive 70 times 7, she says. I figure as how I never get much past 10. She says that to me, and she smiles, and I think within myself that I never get past 2. Fact is, I most often never even get started." Angela felt her face warming. She was harboring a little resentment of her own. Charlie was right. Her mamma would want her to forgive, if indeed she had any reason to be angry at all. Other suitors had changed their minds about the person they had asked to marry. Certainly Carter had a right to a wife without a whole family to tend. Angela went for more coffee. She would spend some time with the Lord in prayer just as soon as Charlie left on his little errand. "Thomas," Angela spoke slowly, hesitantly. She wasn't sure just where or how to start. She could feel tears forming and willed herself not to cry like a silly child. Thomas lifted his head and waited. Angela turned her attention back to her dinner plate. She had determined that Thomas would be told of the change of plans before the children arrived home from school. Angela lifted her head, took a deep breath, and said, "There won't be a wedding after all." Her voice was matter-of-fact and straightforward. Her brother's eyes clouded. Angela read anger in them, and Thomas seldom got angry. "He backed out," he said through clenched teeth. "Let's just say we changed our minds," Angela hurried on. "There were some things we had not discussed before, and when we got to them we couldn't work out a compromise," she said simply. The eyes before her remained dark. Angela hurried on. I'm sorry," she whispered. "I know that it means... But she could not go on. The darkness began to fade from her brother's eyes. Thomas gave a little sigh. Was it one of relief? Angela wondered. He reached for her hand and gave it a squeeze. "Are you terribly disappointed?" he asked. Angela shook her head, tears coming now. I honestly don't know," she managed to say. In some ways, yes. I guess any girl is disappointed when things don't work out as planned. Angela stopped to sniff and wipe at the tears with her handkerchief. But I've done some praying, and I think that it's best this way. I don't think Carter and I, that we were, well, right for each other. But I'm awfully sorry about you. I mean,
about me? Cut in Thomas. What do you mean about me?
Well, you could have left the farm, gone to do your work with seed like you've always dreamed.
Thomas stood. You mean you thought...
I know how much it means to you, she rushed on. And as long as you need to be here, for the children and me, I know you won't just leave us and go, said Angela with a little shrug. Thomas sat down again and leaned toward his sister.
Angela, he said softly but firmly, don't you ever marry anyone, you hear, to try to make things better for the rest of the family.
But it wasn't just that, Angela fumbled. I mean, I liked Carter. He was
arrogant, conceited, and totally uncaring of another's feelings, Thomas said, his voice hard. It was Angela's turn to stand to her feet. Her eyes were wide with shock, and her lower lip trembled in spite of her attempts to still it with her teeth.
You thought that?
Thomas was already repentant. He lowered his head and ran his hand through his hair. I'm sorry, he muttered.
Thomas, said Angela, reaching out a hand to her brother. Why? Why didn't you say so?
For a moment, Thomas could not respond, but at last he looked directly at Angela. Because I thought you loved him. Angela dropped to her chair again.
So did I, she whispered. For a short time, so did I.
And now? Asked Thomas.
I spent a good part of the morning in prayer. Oh, Thomas, I don't think it would have been right at all. Mamma would have known right from the start. I know she would have. I could have been saved the heartbreak if only Mamma...
Don't, said Thomas. Don't berate yourself. You got it worked out. That's all that matters now. We'll just go on as though it never happened. Angela shook her head. She knew she would always be aware of the fact that she had been engaged, then jilted. But she lifted her chin and looked at Thomas. Then her eyes began to twinkle, and her lips formed a wobbly smile. I'll live, she said. I've been wooed and forsaken, but the worst is already over. Life will go on. She blinked back an insistent tear. Thomas stood and pulled her into his arms. For a moment Angela leaned against his broad chest, comforted by the strength of the arms that held her. She would have missed Thomas, but she was so sorry that he couldn't pursue his dream. Good girl, Thomas said. His voice sounded so much like their father's that Angela felt like a little girl again, held safe in her pa's strong arms. Good girl, Thomas said again. Then he released her and went for his cap and heavy coat. Life did go on for Angela. Nothing further was said about the broken engagement. Angela was thankful that Thomas wisely had asked her not to tell anyone of her wedding plans. There were no questions from friends and neighbors to answer. But in her heart, Angela still felt moments of pain. Fortunately, there were few occasions for her to see Carter. Word had it that he was much too busy on the ranch to make it to Sunday church. He did manage the Easter Sunday service, but he sat near the back, and Angela did not have to greet him. Occasionally they met on the streets of the little town, and Angela managed a stiff smile and a good morning. Carter responded in a manner to indicate that Angela had never been anyone special in his life. Angela heard that he was calling at the home of Trudy Somers, but she did not make any effort to verify or discredit these rumors. Winter turned to spring, and Charlie kept good his word about helping Angela plant her garden. She was surprised how much time it freed when Charlie manned the hoe. Thomas planted a large plot of his special seed even before he did the regular planting. He could hardly wait for the new grain to appear so he could judge its success. School ended, and the children were home again. Angela always looked forward to that time of year. It wasn't hard to keep them busy, as there were many jobs around the farmhouse. Derek spent his time helping Thomas in the fields. He was filling out, and even though Angela still thought of him as a young boy, she knew he was quickly becoming a young man. His attitude about himself and about life seemed to improve, but very slowly. Angela knew the pain in his past would likely always haunt him. They still played the memory game, and Derek shared along with the rest. Some stories were poignant, some funny, others joyous. Angela hoped their game helped healing to occur. Louise had far more interest in socializing than in fulfilling household chores. She begged and pestered until Angela was tempted to tell her to just be gone and leave the household in peace. But Angela knew her mother would not have handled it in this manner. "You may have one outing a week," she told her young sister. "You must decide whether it is to be an evening, an afternoon, or a Sunday." Louise sulked for a time, but at last accepted the arrangement. Sarah had grown so much over the winter months that Angela had to let down every inch of her sister's skirts. She would soon be passing on to Louise's hand-me-down dresses. Angela sensed that Sarah would be the tall one, tall and slim like their father. But the growth of the young girl made Angela uneasy. Did it mean that she was about to lose the joyful, teasing, carefree little bundle of energy called Sarah, and gain another changing, pouting, testing adolescent? Angela wasn't sure she would be able to cope with two moody teenagers. Thane was back. He spent every available minute in the fields with Thomas and Derek. He challenged Thomas to checker games and teased Louise about young men of the community. He brought Sarah her lemon drops and licorice sticks and helped Derek fashion a bridle for his new saddle horse. He brought groceries from the store for Charlie and recommended medication for his arthritis. He lounged on the front veranda, talking and laughing, while the long hours of dusk wrapped a soft, dark cloak about the farm. He admired Angela's garden, asked for her company on summer evening walks, brought her books from his own bookshelves, and listened to her plans for sewing new curtains. And it was true. He did watch her carefully, just like Sarah had said, but Angela hardly noticed. She felt at ease with Thane. He was as close as one of the family. There was a security, a fellowship, a feeling of belonging. Angela sensed it, though she could not have defined it. But she, like the others, was very glad that Thane was back.